The land stretched wide under a pale orange sky, silent except for the wind brushing against dry grass, the creak of old wooden fences and the distant sound of an animal calling out. An old human rancher named Thomas lived there, far away from cities and ships, far away from noise and war. His ranch was his world, and he walked across it slowly every morning. Boots heavy, eyes tired, and shoulders bent from years of work. He thought often about the past, about the family he once had, and about how the years had taken more than they had given. Each sunrise was the same. He would feed the few animals he still had, mend a broken fence, and sit on the porch of his small wooden house with a mug of bitter coffee. He would watch the sun climb higher, wondering if today would be the day something different happened, but it never was. The neighbors were long gone. Some moved to better colonies. Others died, and no one came to visit him anymore. Thomas often told himself he was just waiting for the end, that there was nothing left for an old man like him. His ranch had once been full of life. His wife had smiled in the kitchen. His children had run through the fields, their laughter echoing across the wide land. Now the house was empty. The fields felt endless and lonely, and every creak of the windmill sounded like a ghost of what used to be. At night he sometimes talked to himself, pretending his wife was still beside him, but the bed was always cold. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky with streaks of purple and gold, Thomas leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He was so tired. He thought maybe he would not wake up tomorrow. Maybe that was fine. He had lived enough. The galaxy had moved on without him, and he was only a small forgotten part of it. The hum of the insects filled the air, and he almost drifted into sleep when a strange sound cut across the silence. It was not the wind, it was not an animal. It was a low vibration that made the boards of the porch tremble. Thomas opened his eyes, his heart jumped, and he pushed himself up slowly. The sound grew louder, like a giant machine cutting through the sky. He looked up and saw lights, bright and unnatural, moving fast across the heavens. At first he thought it was just another transport ship flying over. Ships sometimes passed this way, though rarely landed, but these lights did not pass. They slowed, hovering over his ranch, glowing red and blue against the darkening sky. The air shook and Thomas felt his knees weaken. The lights dropped lower, and he could now see the shape of a vessel, sleek, metallic. Nothing like the rough freighters he had seen before. This ship was elegant, deadly in its beauty, with markings he could not read glowing across its side. The ground shook as it landed in the open field near his barn, dust rising in thick clouds around it. Thomas grabbed his old rifle out of habit. Though he knew it would be useless against whatever came out of such a ship, still his human pride told him to hold it tight, to not look weak. His breath came hard, his heart thumping in his chest as a ramp lowered from the ship. Out of the haze stepped figures tall and graceful, their silhouettes strange against the orange twilight. As the dust cleared, he could see them better. They were not human. Their skin shimmered in colors his eyes could hardly follow, their faces sharp and beautiful, their eyes glowing faintly in the fading light. They moved together, 11 of them, all women, their clothing dark and flowing like the sky itself. Thomas froze, his old bones stiff, his thoughts racing. Never in his life had he seen aliens up close, only on screens or distant stations, and never on his ranch, yet here they were, walking toward him with purpose, their eyes fixed on him as though they had known him all along. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. Maybe he had died already and this was some strange afterlife. But the trembling of the ground, the sound of their steps, and the weight of their gaze told him it was real. He lifted his rifle slightly, his voice rough. "What do you want here?" he asked, his words breaking the silence. The women stopped a few steps away. Their leader stepped forward, her voice soft yet strong. "We have come for you, human," she said. "We have traveled far and we choose you." Thomas blinked. His mouth dry, he thought surely he misheard. He was just an old rancher, forgotten and alone. Why would beings like this come for him? But their eyes held no doubt. They watched him like he was the center of their universe. The evening air grew heavy, and for the first time in many years, Thomas felt something stir inside him. Not just fear, but something else. Something like the spark of life returning to a place long thought dead. His lonely ranch had always been empty, but tonight, it was the place where destiny had landed, and the old man had no idea that his life was about to change forever. The night was colder than usual, the stars above sharp and bright. Thomas stood frozen on his porch, the rifle still in his hands. The strange women before him did not move quickly or threaten him. They simply stood, tall and quiet, their glowing eyes watching him as if he was something more than an old rancher. His heart hammered, his throat dry. The leader stepped forward, her steps calm and graceful. She had silver patterns on her skin that shimmered like moonlight. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the air. "Do not fear us, human," she said. "We are widows, and we have come to claim a husband." The words struck him like a hammer. His old fingers tightened on the rifle. "Claim a husband," Thomas repeated, his voice cracked with disbelief. "And you came here to me," he laughed without joy. It sounded more like a cough. "I'm no husband, not anymore. I'm just an old man waiting to be buried in the dirt I work on." But the women did not laugh. They looked at him with steady eyes like they saw something he could not. One of them stepped closer, her hair long and dark, her eyes glowing faint green. "You are strong," she said. "We watched from the stars. We studied the one who survives alone. You work the land, you fight off thieves. You do not give up, such spirit is rare." Thomas shook his head, his breath heavy. "Spirit. All I have is tired bones and a ranch no one wants." The leader raised her hand and the rest of the women moved closer. 11 of them now standing in a half-circle before him. "Our husbands are gone," she said, her voice carrying sorrow. "They died in war. They left us without home, without honor. Our people demand we take a new husband or we will lose our place, our names. Everything?" She looked at him with eyes that seemed older than the stars. "We chose you." Thomas felt dizzy. As if the world had spun too fast, he looked at them one by one. Their faces so alien yet so full of something he understood. Pain, longing, and determination. He wanted to tell them they had made a mistake, that he was no savior, that he had nothing left to give, but the words stuck in his throat. He lowered his rifle slowly, setting it against the porch rail. "I can't give you what you want," he whispered. "I buried my wife years ago. I buried my children too. I'm no man for anyone anymore." His voice cracked, his eyes wet though he tried to hide it. The women did not turn away. Instead, one knelt before him, placing her strange hand on the porch floor. Her head bowed. "You will not be alone again," she said softly. "You will be husband to us, protector of us, and we will be your family." Thomas stumbled back, his chair nearly tipping over, his chest a storm of confusion and old grief. The ranch felt smaller now, the land around him no longer empty but alive with presence. He stared at them, 11 widows, each one waiting for his answer. The night wind pulled at his coat, and for the first time in years, Thomas felt the weight of choice pressing on him. Suddenly a sharp cry broke the stillness. From the far side of the barn, shadows moved. A group of raiders, rough men who often prowled the frontier, had seen the ship land. They came with weapons and greedy eyes, hoping to steal whatever treasure had fallen from the sky. Thomas cursed under his breath, his instincts pushing away doubt. He grabbed the rifle again and looked at the widows. "They're coming," he said, his voice low and sharp. "You want to see strength? Then follow me." His old body moved faster than it had in years. His boots stomping across the dirt, the women followed, their movements smooth and ready. The raiders shouted as they ran closer, their flashlights slicing the dark, but they were not ready for what waited. Thomas crouched by the barn wall, rifle steady, his hands sure. He fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoing across the fields, the raiders froze. And in that moment, the widows stepped forward, their eyes blazing, their voices rising in a strange, united cry. Light poured from their hands, energy glowing like fire but colder. The raiders screamed as their weapons melted. Their courage breaking, they turned and fled into the dark, leaving only dust behind. Thomas lowered his rifle, staring at the women in disbelief. "You didn't need me to protect you," he said slowly. But the leader shook her head. "We do," she answered. "Strength is not only battle, strength is spirit. And you have what our people honor." Her words made his chest tighten, his old heart beating harder than it had in years. The night grew quiet again, the stars watching silently. Thomas stood there surrounded by 11 alien widows who now looked at him as if he was already theirs. His hands shook, his voice low. "Why me?" he asked. "Why an old rancher forgotten by his own kind?" The leader stepped closer, her glowing eyes locked on his. "Because you are human, and that is enough." And in that moment, Thomas understood that his life was no longer his alone. The lonely ranch was no longer empty. Destiny had come for him, and it would not let go. The morning came slow, the sun lifting over the dry hills. Thomas sat on his porch with the same chipped mug of coffee in his hands. But everything felt different. The air itself seemed heavier, filled with the quiet presence of the 11 alien widows who now moved across his land as if they had always been there. They had set up strange glowing tents near his barn, their shapes twisting in the light. Tools and devices spread around that hummed with energy he could not name. Thomas rubbed his tired face with one hand, trying to believe what had happened the night before. Raiders chased off, widows kneeling before him, voices saying he was their chosen husband. It made no sense. He was too old, too broken. He wanted peace and nothing more, and yet here he was, staring at 11 women from another world who claimed him as theirs. One of them approached quietly, her steps soft on the dirt. She carried a small bowl that steamed with something that smelled sweet and spicy. Her green glowing eyes softened as she held it out to him. "Eat," she said, her voice almost shy. Thomas frowned. "I can cook my own breakfast," he muttered. But she only tilted her head. "You are husband. We must serve you." He froze, the words striking him like a stone. He took the bowl anyway, tasting the strange food. The flavor burst across his tongue, sharp but rich like nothing he had ever eaten. He hated to admit it, but it was good. Still, he grumbled. "Don't call me that," his voice rough. "I'm not your husband." She only smiled softly, as if his words meant nothing. Later, as Thomas worked on the fence line, 2 of the widows followed him. Their long cloaks brushing the dry grass, they watched every swing of his hammer, every pull of the wire. Finally, one of them spoke, her voice carrying both curiosity and respect. "You repair land with your own hands, without machines, without servants." Thomas didn't look up. "Because no one else will if I don't fix it. It falls apart." She nodded, her glowing eyes narrowing with thought. "That is strength." The words cut him in a way he didn't expect. He wanted to argue, to say it was just survival, nothing noble, but he stayed quiet, his hands steady as he finished tying the wire. Deep inside, something stirred again by afternoon. The widows had begun to work the ranch as if it was theirs too. Some carried water, some tended the animals, their movements alien yet careful. The animals didn't shy away, as if they already trusted them. Thomas watched from the porch, confused, angry, but also curious. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked the leader when she came near. Her silver-marked skin shining in the sun, she stood tall, her eyes glowing like stars. "Because we are not begging," she said. "We are offering. You give us name." "We give you life," Thomas shook his head. "Name? What's in a name?" The leader's expression hardened. "For us, name is survival. Without husband, widows are nothing. Our clans erase us. Our children cannot live with honor. We become dust." She paused, her voice softening. "With you, we live again." Thomas turned away, his jaw tight. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he was no savior, but the truth was written in their eyes. They had nowhere else to go, nowhere else to belong. That night, Thomas sat alone by the fire pit. Staring at the flames, the widows sat nearby, singing in a language he didn't know, their voices weaving together like the wind itself. It was haunting and beautiful. He closed his eyes, listening, his chest aching with memories of his wife singing to their children long ago. But the peace did not last. From the ridge came the sound of engines. More raiders, stronger than before, drawn by the story of a strange ship landing. Thomas cursed, grabbing his rifle. The widows rose in silence, their glowing eyes flashing like blades in the dark. The raiders stormed down, shouting, firing into the air. But Thomas did not run. He stood tall, shouting back, "This is my land," his voice carried across the night. And for the first time in years, it held fire. The widows formed a line beside him, their cloaks whipping in the wind, their hands glowing with energy. The raiders laughed, thinking the old man was weak. But when the first shot rang out, Thomas fired true, hitting the ground near their leader. The widows unleashed their strange light. Blinding and sharp, the raiders panicked, some falling, some fleeing, and within minutes the ranch was safe again. Breathless, Thomas lowered his rifle. His old heart racing, he looked at the widows, their eyes burning with respect. The leader stepped close, her voice low. "You still think you are not husband?" she asked. Thomas opened his mouth to deny it, but the word died on his lips because in that moment, standing with them against the dark, he felt something he thought was long dead. He felt needed, and for the first time in many lonely years, Thomas was not sure he wanted to push it away. The days that followed were strange for Thomas. The widows moved across his land as if they had always belonged there. Their tents glowed faintly at night like fireflies on the field. Their voices filled the silence with songs and strange laughter. Yet Thomas still woke every morning with the same thought. This isn't real. He was an old rancher, not a man for legends, but reality did not care what he believed. One afternoon, as he worked by the barn, the leader of the widows approached, her silver markings glinting in the light. Enemies will return, she said plainly, her glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. They will not stop after one failure. They know we are here. They know what we carry. Thomas frowned, sweat on his brow. What you carry? He asked. What do you mean by that? The widow paused, then touched the device on her wrist. It hummed, projecting a map of stars. We hold the keys to our clan's last treasures, weapons, and memory. Many would kill to own it. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. Suddenly the ranch seemed too small to hide such secrets. Then you've brought your war here, he muttered. But the widow only shook her head. We brought our future here, and you are part of it. That night the test came. The sky lit with fire as a larger ship descended, heavier than the raiders' speeders, armored and loud. It shook the earth as it landed on the ridge. Thomas stood on the porch, rifle in hand, his heart thumping like a drum. The widows gathered around him, their eyes glowing bright, their faces calm. You do not need to fight, one of them said gently. We can protect you, but Thomas growled. It's my land. My fight too. The enemy poured out, mercenaries, armored and armed with weapons too advanced for the frontier. Their leader shouted across the field. Hand over the widows and no one dies. His voice echoed through the night. Thomas spat into the dirt. Not happening, he muttered, his hand steadying the rifle. The widows stood shoulder to shoulder with him, and for the first time Thomas did not feel old. He felt alive. The mercenaries advanced, and the air filled with tension. Then fire erupted, lasers cutting through the dark. The widows raised glowing shields, their energy bending the shots away. Thomas fired back, his old rifle cracking like thunder, each shot driving the mercenaries closer to fear. But the fight was harder than before. The enemy was trained, their weapons sharp, their numbers overwhelming. The widows fought with power and grace, their light searing the night, but the mercenaries kept pushing. One broke through the line, charging straight at Thomas. The rancher swung his rifle like a club, striking the man down, his body moving with strength he thought he had lost years ago. The battle raged, fire and smoke choking the air. The barn caught flames. Thomas shouted orders without thinking. You three cover the left, hold that fence line. The rest with me. The widows obeyed, not as strangers, but as partners. As family together, they pushed back inch by inch, until the mercenaries finally broke, fleeing into the night. Their ship roaring away into the stars, silence fell heavy, the field smoking. The barn burned halfway but still stood. Thomas leaned on his rifle, his chest heaving, his arms aching. The widows surrounded him, their glowing eyes watching with something more than respect. One knelt at his feet. Husband, she whispered, you carry fire in your spirit. He shook his head weakly. I carry stubbornness, that's all. But deep inside he knew it was more. The leader stepped forward, her silver-marked skin shining in the firelight. This was your test of fire, she said. We stood with you, you stood with us. Now you see why we chose you. Thomas looked at them, his tired face lined with ash and sweat, his old heart pounding with something fierce, something alive. He thought of his wife, of his children, of the years he had wasted waiting to die. And then he looked at the widows, 11 pairs of glowing eyes filled with hope, and he realized his life was not over. Not yet. Maybe destiny had saved its hardest role for him. That night, as the flames died and the stars returned, the lonely ranch was no longer just his home. It was a fortress, a place of belonging, and though Thomas did not say the words aloud, he understood for the first time he was not alone anymore. The days after the battle changed everything on the ranch. The fences still stood, though half the barn smelled of smoke. The fields carried scars from fire and blasts. Yet the land felt alive in a way Thomas had not felt in years. The widows moved with purpose, repairing, planting, building, their strange devices glowing in the dust as if magic had touched the soil. Thomas woke early as always, but when he stepped onto the porch, he no longer saw empty fields. He saw 11 women working side by side, carrying water, tending animals, raising new walls where old wood had burned. Their voices filled the air, a mix of alien words and laughter that stirred something deep in his chest. He joined them with his hammer, his saw, his rough hands. At first they tried to stop him, saying, "Husbands should not labor." But Thomas only grunted. On this ranch, everyone works. The widows looked at one another, then nodded, and for the first time, they worked together as one family. Strange structures rose beside his barn, tall frames of shimmering light that pulsed like beating hearts. Alien crops grew where his dry soil had long resisted seed. His animals seemed healthier. Even the windmill turned smoother, powered by something the widows had quietly installed. The ranch was no longer just a place of survival. It was becoming something greater. But with the change came whispers. Traders passing through the frontier spoke of the old human with 11 alien wives. Some laughed, some envied, some feared. And across the stars the tale traveled faster than any horse or ship. Thomas heard it from a peddler one morning, the man leaning close with wide eyes. "They're talking about you in the colonies, calling you the husband of widows." Thomas scowled, his jaw tightening. "I didn't ask for that name." But the widows only smiled, as if the title was already a crown. Life on the ranch was not without tension. The widows had customs Thomas did not understand. They sang at sunrise, their voices weaving in strange harmonies that made his skin prickle. They painted symbols on the barn door, calling it protection, and they treated him with a respect he found uncomfortable, serving him food, bowing their heads when he spoke. Thomas growled at them more than once. "Stop treating me like some king. I'm just a rancher," but they always answered, "To us you are more." At night Thomas sat by the fire with them, listening as they shared stories of their lost husbands, warriors who had died in battles Thomas had never heard of. He saw the pain in their glowing eyes, the grief hidden behind their strength, and for the first time, he realized they had not chosen him out of pity or desperation. They had chosen him because they needed someone who would not break. One evening, the leader placed a carved stone in his hands, smooth and cold with markings like stars. "This is the bond stone," she said softly. "In our world, a husband holds it, and the wives draw strength from him. You may not understand our ways, but we will follow you as if you were born of our blood." Thomas stared at the stone, his rough fingers trembling. He wanted to throw it away to deny it, but he kept it. The peace did not last long. Late one night, as he sat alone on the porch, Thomas saw shadows at the ridge, not raiders this time, but scouts, armored figures watching from afar. The widows appeared behind him without sound, their leader whispering, "They come not for us, but for you." Thomas's stomach turned. "For me," he muttered. "Why?" The widow's glowing eyes darkened. "Because word spreads and power fears what it cannot control. A human chosen by widows threatens more than pride. It threatens empires." The days grew heavier. But Thomas did not bend. He worked his land. He trained his body as best he could. And he stood beside the widows as they prepared for what was coming. Because deep inside, he knew this ranch was no longer just dirt and fences. It was the center of something much larger, something the galaxy itself could not ignore. And though Thomas still told himself he was just an old man, each night when he felt the bond stone warm in his hand, he could not shake the truth. His life was no longer over. It had only just begun. The nights grew uneasy on the ranch. Thomas noticed it first in the silence of the animals. The way the horses lifted their heads at shadows. The way the cattle shifted nervously as if they felt a storm in the air. The widows noticed it too, their glowing eyes always turning toward the horizon, their voices low when they spoke in their own language. One morning, a trader rode in fast, his face pale, his wagon nearly overturned in the dirt. "They're coming," he gasped. "Not raiders, not mercenaries. Something bigger. Warships in the sky, scouts in the valleys. They're talking about you, the human with alien wives." Thomas's chest tightened. The words he had feared now spoken aloud. The widows gathered around him, silent but watchful. That night Thomas sat by the fire, staring at the bond stone in his rough hands. Its surface glowed faintly as if alive. He thought of leaving, packing what little he had and slipping away. Maybe if he vanished, the widows could escape the danger. But when he looked at their faces, proud and unafraid, he knew leaving was not in him. He had run from grief before, but this time he would not. The widows built defenses around the ranch, not walls of wood, but barriers of light, shimmering shields that hummed softly in the wind. They taught Thomas how to use alien tools, a blade that cut through metal as if it was cloth, a device that could blind enemies with a flash. He stumbled, cursed, but he learned, his old hand steadier than he expected. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, figures appeared on the ridge. Not raiders this time, but soldiers armored in black, carrying banners Thomas did not know. Their leader's voice carried across the wind. "Old man, surrender the widow, surrender your bond, and we may spare your life." Thomas stood tall on his porch, rifle in hand, his voice rough but strong. "This is my land and my family. I won't hand them over." The widows stood at his side, cloaks snapping in the wind, their glowing eyes burning like fire. The soldiers attacked, their weapons sharper, their numbers greater than anything Thomas had faced. But the ranch was no longer a lonely patch of dirt. It was a fortress. The widows unleashed their light, shields holding, energy bolts cutting the dark. Thomas fired from cover, his shots loud and certain. One by one the soldiers fell back, but more poured forward. The ground shook as a small ship descended, its engines tearing the sky. Armored figures rushed out faster, stronger. One charged at Thomas, his blade high. Thomas met him with his rifle, blocking, striking, his old muscles burning but refusing to fail. The widow beside him drove her glowing spear through the soldier's armor. Saving his life, the fight stretched long, fire and smoke rising. The house splintered under blasts, but Thomas did not falter. He barked orders like a commander. The widows moved as if they had always fought under him, their voices answering his. Together they held the line. Finally the enemy broke, dragging their wounded back to their ship. The engines roared and they vanished into the night sky. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of burning wood. Thomas leaned on his rifle, his chest heaving, sweat and ash streaking his lined face. The widows gathered around him, their eyes glowing with fierce pride. "You stood when most would fall," the leader said softly. "You chose us, though death waited at your door." Thomas shook his head, tired but steady. "I didn't choose anything," he said. "I just protected what's mine." But the truth pressed in his chest. He had chosen. He had stood not just for land, but for them, for family. The widows knelt as one, their voices rising in unison, a song of honor that wrapped around him like fire and wind. Thomas felt the bond stone warm in his palm, stronger than ever. And for the first time, he did not fight it. In that moment, he knew the danger was not over. More would come, stronger, hungrier. The galaxy had noticed him, and it would not look away. But he also knew something else, something far deeper. He was no longer just an old rancher waiting to die. He was the protector of 11 widows, the husband of a new family, and he would not let anyone take that away. The sky above the ranch was no longer quiet. Every night Thomas could see distant flashes, warships moving in orbit like wolves circling prey. The widows stood at the edge of the fields watching, their glowing eyes narrowed, their voices low with worry. "They gather," the leader whispered. "They will come with all their strength. This is not a raid. This is war." Thomas sat on the porch, the bond stone heavy in his palm. He felt its strange warmth seep into his bones. He thought about the years he had wasted waiting for death, about the wife and children buried in the soil of this land, and now about the 11 women who had chosen him, women who trusted him to stand when the galaxy demanded he kneel. His jaw tightened. "If they want a war," he said, "then they'll find one right here." The widows prepared the ranch for the final stand. Alien shields shimmered over the fences. Weapons of light hummed in the barn. The animals were moved deep underground into a cavern Thomas had never known existed until the widows showed him. Every corner of the ranch became a fortress. Thomas walked among it all with his old rifle across his back, offering gruff words that carried more weight than he realized. At dawn the enemy came, a fleet descended, smaller ships streaking down through the sky. Soldiers poured out, black armor gleaming, banners of empire snapping in the wind. The ground shook under their boots. Their commander's voice rang out, "Surrender the widows, surrender the bond, or burn with them." Thomas stepped forward, his boots kicking up dust, his shoulders square, rifle in hand. 11 widows stood beside him, cloaks swirling in the wind, their eyes blazing. "This is my land," Thomas shouted back, his voice strong enough to carry across the field. "And my family, you'll get neither." The first wave struck, the air ripped apart by fire. The widows raised their shields, light bending and sparking as it absorbed the blasts. Thomas fired with deadly aim, each shot echoing like thunder. He moved from cover to cover, shouting orders. "Hold the left. Push them back on the ridge." The widows obeyed, their voices answering his like soldiers to a general. The battle raged for hours, the ranch scarred with fire and smoke. Enemies fell, but more poured in. Thomas's body ached, his arms heavy. Yet he refused to stop when his rifle emptied. He grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon, blasting until his hands burned. One widow was struck, her cry piercing the chaos. Thomas carried her back, blood on his shirt, rage in his eyes. "No one touches them," he growled, and his shots came fiercer, faster. The enemy commander pushed forward, a giant in black armor. Blade glowing with cruel fire, he pointed it at Thomas. "You are nothing but an old man," he roared. Thomas spat into the dirt, lifting his weapon. "Maybe," he growled, "but I'm the old man who's going to bury you right here." The fight between them was brutal. Blade against rifle, sparks flying. the commander stronger, faster. But Thomas fought with grit, with fury, with the weight of every year he had survived. Just as the blade swung for his chest, the widow's voices rose in a united cry. The bondstone in his hand flared with light, power coursing through him like fire. For a heartbeat, Thomas felt young again. His arm steady, his strike sure. He drove the rifle butt into the commander's chest. Knocking him back, the widows unleashed their full power, light searing through the sky. The commander fell screaming, his army breaking, fleeing into the burning dawn. Silence followed, smoke rising from the fields. The ranch scarred but standing, Thomas dropped to his knees. Breath ragged, the widows surrounded him, lifting him up, their glowing eyes shining with fierce pride and love. "Husband of 11 worlds," the leader whispered. "Your name will not be forgotten." Thomas looked out across the land. The soil blackened, the house battered yet alive. His heart swelled with something he had thought long dead. Not just survival, but belonging. He was no longer alone, no longer waiting to fade away. He was legend now, not because he sought it, but because he refused to bend. And so the story spread across the stars of an old human rancher who stood against empires, who was claimed by 11 alien widows, and who proved that even in the last years of a man's life, the fire of humanity could burn bright enough to shake the galaxy itself. The smoke cleared slowly from the fields, the sun rose over blackened soil, and the old ranch that had once been silent and forgotten now carried the scars of war and the whispers of legend. Thomas stood on his porch, his body aching, his clothes torn, the bondstone glowing faintly in his hand. The widows moved around him with quiet grace, tending the wounded, repairing the shields, their eyes bright with a fire that no enemy had managed to put out. Word spread faster than any ship. Traders carried the story to the colonies. Smugglers told it in the hidden ports. Even council halls across the galaxy spoke the name of the old human rancher. They called him protector, husband, legend. Some feared him. Some laughed at the thought of an aged man standing against armies. But those who had seen the battle knew the truth. And the truth carried weight. One evening, a messenger ship landed by the fields, its hull marked with the crest of a distant world. Diplomats stepped out, not soldiers, their heads bowed. "We come to honor the bond," they said. "The widows who chose you are now shielded by our word." Thomas scowled, leaning on his rifle. "I didn't fight for your words. I fought for my land and my family." The diplomats only nodded. "That is why your story spreads, because you did not fight for power, and yet you became powerful." Life on the ranch slowly settled into something new. The widows built homes beside his, half alien, half human, glowing walls mixed with rough wood. The land bloomed with crops never seen before. Animals grew strong. The nights were filled with songs that blended human sorrow and alien hope. Thomas still woke before dawn, still worked the fences, but when he looked up, he was no longer alone in the fields. Children from nearby colonies began to visit, curious, laughing at the glowing lights and strange songs. The widows welcomed them, teaching them, feeding them, calling them little brothers and sisters. Thomas watched and felt something shift inside him. His ranch had become more than land. It had become a refuge, a place where walls fell and families were rebuilt. But the galaxy was not quiet. From the shadows came whispers of revenge, warlords whose pride had been broken, empires that could not accept the story of a human rancher defying them. Thomas knew the danger was not gone, but when he looked at the widows, when he felt the warmth of the bondstone in his palm, he did not feel fear, he felt resolve. One night, as the stars burned bright, the leader of the widows sat beside him on the porch, her silver markings glowing softly. "You have given us more than life," she said, her voice low. "You gave us a future, and now your name is spoken in 11 worlds. Your story will not die with you." Thomas looked at her. Tired eyes softened. "I never asked for this," he said quietly. "I only wanted to keep my ranch standing," she smiled. Faint but true. "And that is why you became legend. Because you never sought the crown, yet it rests on your head." Thomas leaned back, listening to the laughter of the widows drifting through the night. For the first time in many years, he felt peace. Not the peace of waiting for death, but the peace of a man who had found his place. And so the tale of the old human rancher was carried to every corner of the stars. A story told in hushed tones in council chambers, in rowdy voices in spaceports, and in soft songs sung by children who had never seen Earth. They called him the husband of 11 worlds, the protector who turned a lonely ranch into a fortress of hope. But to Thomas it was simpler. He was just a man who had been alone too long. until 11 widows stepped out of the sky and reminded him that life was not over until the last breath left his body. He smiled faintly, gripping the bondstone, the fire in his spirit still burning, and the stars above seemed to bow quietly to the human who refused to be forgotten.